When you were a kid, the drive to a relative's house felt endless. The school year stretched on forever. A single summer was its own era. Then, somewhere in your 20s, it changed. Birthdays started arriving faster. Years began folding into each other. People in their 70s will tell you their whole life feels like it happened in an afternoon. The same amount of time, somehow moving at completely different speeds. Why? The answer says something disturbing about how little of your life you're actually awake for. The explanation you've probably heard is simple. You get older, life gets busier, so time flies. Work, bills, kids, responsibility. You're too distracted to notice the years, so they blur. It sounds right. It's also almost completely wrong. Because if being busy were the cause, the busiest people alive would feel time moving the fastest. But that's not what happens. Think about the slowest stretch of time you've ever lived through. A boring shift that wouldn't end. A long week stuck in bed sick. A waiting room. You can be busy and feel time crawl. You can be doing nothing and feel a whole evening vanish. Schedule isn't the lever. Something deeper is pulling it. And people have been chasing it for over a century. In 1877, a French philosopher named Paul Janet proposed an idea so simple it almost feels like a trick. He suggested we don't measure a year against a clock. We measure it against every year we've already lived. When you're 2 years old, a single year is half of your entire existence. It's enormous. It's an eternity. When you're 50, that same year is 1/50th of your life. A rounding error. The calendar hasn't changed. The fraction has. Each new year is a thinner and thinner slice of the whole, so each one feels smaller than the last. Now run that math forward, and you get something genuinely unsettling. In 1975, a chemist named Robert Lemlich took Janet's idea and pushed it into hard equations. And by his model, if you measure a life by how long each stretch feels instead of how long it lasts, the halfway point doesn't land at 40. It lands somewhere around 20. Read that again. By the time you're barely old enough to drink, you may have already lived half of your life as you will ever experience it. Everything after that is the back half, played at double speed. The philosopher William James wrote about this in 1890 in a book that helped found modern psychology. He described how, as we age, the years seem to grow hollow and collapse into each other until decades feel like they slipped by in an instant. But Janet and James could only describe the feeling. They couldn't open it up and show you the gears inside. That took another 100 years, and the proportion idea, it turns out, is only half the story. Because your brain isn't actually sitting there doing division. It doesn't track your age and shrink each year on purpose. It does something far stranger. It measures time by how much it remembers. Think about why your childhood feels so long in hindsight. It isn't because the days were slower. It's because almost everything was new. Your first day of school, the first time you saw the ocean, the first kiss, the first real loss, the first time it hit you that one day you would stop existing. Every single one of those was a first. And your brain records firsts in high definition. New experiences get burned in deep. Your brain flags them as important and lays down a thick, detailed trail. So when you look back on your early years, they feel vast, packed wall to wall with distinct, vivid, retrievable moments. Now picture an average week from your adult life. You woke up, you took the same route you always take, you did the work you always do, you ate something familiar, scrolled something familiar, went to sleep, and did the whole thing again the next day. How much of that did your brain bother to keep? Almost none of it, because none of it was new. This is the real engine. Your sense of how much time has passed isn't read off a clock. It's reconstructed later from memories. And when the memories thin out, time appears to shrink. An entire year of routine can collapse into one smeared impression. Work was busy, nothing much happened, while a single trip somewhere new, taken decades ago, still plays back in full color. Researchers call it the holiday paradox. A week in a new place feels fast while you're living it, because you're swept up in constant novelty. But in memory, that same week feels long, because it left so many marks. Routine does the exact opposite. It feels perfectly normal as you live it, then disappears almost entirely when you look back. The writer Claudia Hammond laid this out in 2012. The amount of time you remember is built from how many new memories you actually made, and adulthood, by its very design, is the slow starving of new memories. But memory isn't even the deepest layer. Underneath it, your brain is doing something to time that's far harder to fight. There's a biological layer running underneath even that. Novelty doesn't just get remembered better. It changes how you feel time in the moment it's happening. When you encounter something new, your brain releases dopamine, and dopamine appears to bend your internal clock, the rough timekeeper ticking in the background of your mind. Neuroscientist Warren Meck at Duke University spent years showing that this internal clock is anything but fixed. It speeds up and slows down, depending on your attention, your emotions, your chemistry. Fear stretches time. That's why a car crash seems to unfold in slow motion. Novelty stretches it too. Boredom and repetition do the reverse. They compress it into nothing. Neuroscientist David Eagleman tested this directly. He dropped volunteers backward off a tower into a safety net, a terrifying free fall lasting just under 3 seconds, and afterward they swore it had lasted far longer. The fall didn't change. Their brains, flooded and recording everything, simply laid down more memory. And more memory read back as more time. And there's evidence the change gets physically baked in as you age. In 2019, Adrian Bayan, an engineer at Duke, proposed something almost eerie. He argued that as we get older, our brains literally process images more slowly. As a child, your mind takes in a flood of mental snapshots every second. As those neural pathways age and slow down, you capture fewer frames in the same window of time. Fewer images per second means less perceived change, and less perceived change feels like less time. In other words, a child experiences more reality per minute than you do. Their day runs at a higher resolution. Yours has quietly started to compress. So that's the answer. Proportion, memory, dopamine, aging hardware. Case closed. Well, not quite. Because buried inside all of that is something the science rarely says out loud. If time feels fast because your brain stops recording, then the speed of your life is not actually being set by your age. It's being set by how much you let yourself experience. The years don't blur because you got old. They blur because, somewhere along the way, you stopped doing things worth remembering. The same brain that turned one childhood summer into an entire universe is still sitting inside your skull. It still records novelty in high definition. It still stretches time around anything new. You just stopped feeding it. This is the uncomfortable part. Most adults don't lose their time to aging. They lose it to repetition they chose. The same drive, the same desk, the same scroll, the same single year lived 40 times in a row and called a life. But the effect runs in both directions. And that's the part that should change how you walk out of here. People who deliberately pack their lives with new things, new places, new skills, new people, real discomfort, consistently report that their years start to feel long again. Not because they found extra hours, because they finally gave their brains something to write down. You can't slow the clock on the wall, but you can change how much of it you actually keep. So go back one more time to that endless summer from when you were small. The one that felt like a whole world you could get lost in. It was never actually longer than the summers you have now. The Earth didn't turn any slower for you back then. The only real difference is that, in those days, you were paying attention. Everything was new, so everything counted. So everything stayed. And then, somewhere along the line, the days started showing up already familiar. And a mind with nothing new to hold simply lets the years run straight through it, like water through open hands. That's the hard news, and the good news at the same time. The speed was never fixed. The blur was never your fate. You have just been letting time pour past you without ever stopping to look at it. So the real question isn't why life feels faster as you get older. The real question is how many more years you're willing to lose before you start watching them go.